The room went dead silent the moment Aldine Mercer opened her mouth. Not because anyone expected her to speak. Not because they'd asked her anything, but because what came out of that 68-year-old mouth, in a language no one in that boardroom thought she knew, stopped a man worth $400 million from walking out the door, and saved a deal that 3 lawyers, 2 financial advisors, and 1 very expensive consultant had already given up on. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody, that is, except Aldine. She'd known for about 20 minutes that something was wrong. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because you need to understand who Aldine Mercer was before you can understand what she did, and why it mattered. Aldine had worked as a custodial specialist at the Hargrove Grand Hotel in downtown Atlanta for 11 years. She was 68 years old. With close-cropped silver hair, she kept neat under a small hairnet during shifts, and hands that showed every one of those years. Thick-knuckled, dry at the knuckles, calloused in the way that only comes from decades of real work. She wore her Navy uniform the way a soldier wears a dress uniform, pressed, clean, exact, every button fastened, apron spotless. She took that seriously. Always had. She'd been a schoolteacher once. 31 years in the Atlanta public school system, teaching middle school English and, for a brief glorious period in the late 90s, an elective she designed herself called World Languages and Culture. She'd taught herself Mandarin at 52 years old using library books. Cassette tapes she checked out and never returned, and sheer stubbornness. She'd gotten good enough to pass a proficiency exam. Good enough to teach her students the basics. Good enough that a delegation of Taiwanese educators who visited her school in 2003 shook her hand and told her, in Mandarin, that her accent was better than they'd expected from someone who had never left Georgia. She'd smiled and told them, in Mandarin, that she appreciated the qualifier. Then the school district restructured. Then her husband Leonard got sick. Then he died. Then her daughter moved to Portland and stopped calling regularly. Then the pension she'd counted on turned out to be less than she'd planned. Then 65 became 66, became 67, and the substitute teaching jobs dried up the way things dry up when the world decides you're no longer useful. And Aldine Mercer, who had spent 31 years shaping young minds, who had taught herself an entire tonal language in her 50s, who had buried a husband and raised a daughter, mostly alone after he got sick, found herself mopping floors and emptying wastebaskets in a hotel where no one knew her name. They called her the cleaning lady. Even the ones who meant it kindly. She didn't correct them. She just showed up, pressed uniform, clean apron, every day. The Hargrove Grand was the kind of hotel that hosted the kind of meetings you read about in business sections of newspapers. Mergers, acquisitions, development deals, people in very good suits, drinking very bad coffee, and deciding things that affected other people who would never be invited into those rooms. The deal on the table that particular Tuesday in March was a $400 million acquisition. A Chinese development group, Shengtai Capital, out of Shenzhen, was buying a majority stake in the Hargrove Property Group, which owned 4 hotels in the southeast, including the one Aldine cleaned every day. The American side was being led by a man named Bradford Collier. No, wait. Bradford Collier was on the list. The American side was being led by a man named Garrison Holt. Garrison was 51 years old, had the handshake of someone who'd practiced it in mirrors, and had been in commercial real estate long enough to believe that every deal was, at its core, a performance. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Aldine made in 2 months. He had 2 lawyers with him and a financial consultant named Pam, who Aldine had noticed once, in passing, was very good at looking confident while saying nothing. The Chinese delegation was led by a man named Wei Jianming. Aldine knew who Wei Jianming was because she'd looked him up the week before, when she heard the hotel staff talking about the big meeting coming up. She looked people up. She always had. Old teacher habit. Know who's in the room before the room fills up. Wei Jianming was 64 years old. He'd built Shengtai Capital from a mid-sized construction firm into one of the larger private development groups in Guangdong province. He was known, according to the 3 articles Aldine found in her library's digital database, for being methodical, private, and this word came up twice, unforgiving when he felt he'd been misled. She filed that away. The meeting was in the Meridian Room on the 4th floor. Aldine's assignment that morning was the 4th floor hallway, and the 2 executive suites at the end of the corridor. It wasn't her job to be in the Meridian Room. She wouldn't have been anywhere near it except that, around 10:45, one of the hotel's event staff, a young man named Tobias, early 20s, panicked eyes, stopped her in the hallway, and said the coffee station inside the conference room had spilled. Could she come handle it before it got into the carpet? Aldine came. The room was thick with that particular tension that settles over a negotiation that isn't going well. She could feel it before she pushed the door open. That particular quality of silence that isn't peaceful. It's held, like breath. Garrison Holt was at the head of the table on one side. Wei Jianming was across from him, with 2 associates whose names Aldine didn't know. A translator, young woman, early 30s, named Fiona, according to her badge, sat slightly behind Wei's left shoulder. Pam the consultant was on her phone. The 2 lawyers looked at the ceiling. Nobody looked at Aldine. She moved to the coffee station along the side wall, got her towels out, and started cleaning up the spill quietly. Years of custodial work had taught her how to be invisible in a room. You move slowly. You don't make eye contact. You don't exist, as far as the people in the room are concerned. You are furniture that occasionally moves. She cleaned. She listened. The negotiation was stuck on governance, specifically on what would happen to current hotel management staff after the acquisition. Who would have operational authority? How disputes between the American property managers and Shengtai's appointed directors would be resolved, and who ultimately would have the final word on staffing decisions. Garrison wanted assurances that his people would maintain day-to-day control. Wei, through Fiona, was saying that Shengtai expected full operational integration within 18 months. It wasn't going well. But that wasn't what caught Aldine's attention. What caught her attention was a document. She wasn't supposed to be reading documents. She was cleaning a coffee spill. But the pages were spread across the table near where she was working, and Aldine Mercer had been a reader her entire life. The kind of reader who absorbs printed words the way other people breathe air, automatically and without thinking about it. The document was a governance amendment, an addendum to the main acquisition agreement. She could see enough of it from where she stood. And something was wrong. She couldn't read it all. She didn't need to. She'd spent 3 decades teaching language, which meant she'd spent 3 decades teaching her students to read carefully, to notice what wasn't said as much as what was. The amendment described a dispute resolution clause, standard language, except the clause referenced an arbitration body that Aldine, who had spent some of the longer evenings of her widowhood reading about international business law, the way some women read romance novels, recognized immediately. The arbitration body referenced in that document had dissolved in 2019. It no longer existed. Any dispute clause referencing it was functionally unenforceable. The whole amendment was built on a mechanism that had no legal teeth. She didn't know if this was intentional. She didn't know which side had drafted it. She didn't know if the lawyers in the room had caught it. She didn't know anything, really, except that she was a 68-year-old woman with a mop handle in her hand, a spotless apron, and 31 years of experience believing that it was always better to say the true thing than to stay quiet for the sake of being comfortable. She finished cleaning the spill. She folded her towels. She started moving toward the door, and then Wei Jianming stood up. He didn't raise his voice. That was the thing about him. Everything in those articles about being methodical, private, unforgiving. He simply stood, said something brief in Mandarin that Fiona translated with just a slight hesitation. Mr. Wei thanks everyone for their time and will be in touch through his legal team, and buttoned his jacket. His 2 associates began gathering papers. Garrison Holt looked like a man watching a fire he didn't know how to stop. Pam the consultant looked at her phone. The lawyers looked at each other, and Aldine stood by the door she was about to open, holding her cleaning caddy, and made a decision. She turned around. "Mr. Wei." She said it in Mandarin. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way you say something when you want to be heard by exactly one person. The room went still. Wei Jianming stopped. He looked at her. Not the way people in that building usually looked at her. Through her. Past her, at the space she occupied rather than at her. He looked at her the way a person looks at something unexpected. Carefully. She continued. In Mandarin. She said, "I apologize for interrupting. My name is Aldine Mercer. I work in this hotel. I have no business being in this conversation, and I understand that. But I noticed something in the document on the table, and I believe you should know before you leave." The silence in the room had changed quality. It was no longer held breath. It was something else, the particular stillness of people who have stopped pretending to do other things. Fiona, the translator, had her mouth slightly open. Garrison Holt said, "Excuse me, what is?" Wei held up one hand, just slightly. Garrison stopped. Wei looked at Aldine and said, in Mandarin, "What did you notice?" She told him. She kept it brief because she'd always taught her students that brevity was a form of respect. It meant you believed the other person was smart enough to understand you without being told the same thing 3 times. She described the amendment. She named the arbitration body. She said the year it dissolved. She said that as far as she understood, any clause referencing it would not hold up if challenged, which meant the governance protections both sides thought they were agreeing to were, in practice, unenforceable. She said she didn't know which side had drafted the language. She said it wasn't her place to say whether it was intentional. She said she only knew that a deal this large, built on a clause with no foundation, seemed like something both parties would want to know about before they signed anything. Then she said, in English, because she thought Garrison Holt deserved to understand what was happening in his own meeting. The arbitration body in your governance amendment dissolved in 2019. The clause may not be legally enforceable. The room was completely silent. Garrison looked at his lawyers. One of them, the younger one, a woman named something Aldine didn't catch, had already pulled out her phone and was typing fast. Wei Jianming looked at Aldine for a long moment. Then he looked at the document on the table. Then he sat back down. "Please," he said, in English this time, "show me." She showed him. She set down her cleaning caddy, carefully, so it didn't make noise, and she walked to the table and pointed to the specific clause. Wei read it. His associate read it. Fiona leaned over and read it. The younger lawyer on Garrison's side looked up from her phone and said quietly, "She's right. The International Commercial Arbitration Center merged with another body in 2018 and formally dissolved in early 2019. This reference is defunct." Garrison Holt sat down. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was the quiet kind. The kind where a man realizes that the deal he thought he had isn't the deal that actually exists, and he has to decide in real time whether to be angry about it or fix it. To his credit, he fixed it. He looked at Wei and said, "We need to recess. I want to look at this with my team and figure out where this language came from and what we need to replace it with. I owe you that." Wei nodded once. Slowly. Then he looked at Aldine again. "How do you know about international arbitration law?" he asked, in English this time. And Aldine Mercer, who had 31 years in a classroom, who had taught herself Mandarin from library books, who had buried her husband and stretched her pension and showed up every day in a pressed uniform to a job that paid her $12 above minimum wage, looked at this man who was worth $400 million and said simply, "I read a lot, always have." Wei almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, more of a controlled recognition. Like a man who has spent a lifetime respecting competence and finds himself, unexpectedly, respecting it in a place he didn't think to look. He said something to his associate in Mandarin. The associate wrote something down. Then the delegation excused themselves to make calls. Garrison Holt sat at the table for a moment after they left. His lawyer, the younger one, was still on her phone, pulling up documentation. Pam the consultant had finally put hers down. Garrison looked at Aldine. He didn't seem to know what to say, which was unusual for a man who made his living saying things. "You just—" he started. "I just cleaned up a coffee spill," Aldine said. She picked up her caddy. "You're welcome to the room as long as you need it." She walked out. She didn't expect anything to come of it. That was the honest truth. She'd said what she said because she believed in saying true things, not because she expected a reward for it. She went back to her work. She cleaned the 2 executive suites. She finished her floor assignment. She took her lunch break in the staff break room on the 2nd floor and ate the sandwich she'd made that morning. Turkey on wheat, yellow mustard, the same thing she'd been eating for 40 years because Leonard had liked it, and then she'd just kept making it. And she didn't think about Wei Jianming or Garrison Holt or the Meridian Room again, until Tobias found her near the service elevator at 2:15 in the afternoon and said, with wide eyes, that someone from the 4th floor was looking for her. The someone was Wei Jianming's associate. His name was Daniel. He introduced himself in English with the careful fluency of someone who'd been speaking it professionally for years. He said that Mr. Wei would like a moment of her time, if she was available. She looked at her watch. She had a half-hour before she needed to start on the 3rd floor corridor. She said she was available. Wei Jianming was in one of the executive suites, not the Meridian Room, which still had lawyers in it, apparently. He was standing by the window when she came in, looking out at the Atlanta skyline the way people look at things when they're thinking about something else entirely. He turned when she entered. He said, in Mandarin, "How long have you spoken Mandarin?" she said. "Since I was 52. 16 years, he said. "Why?" She thought about it. "I was teaching a world languages elective. I wanted to understand what I was teaching." "You were a teacher." 31 years. Middle school English, mostly. He was quiet for a moment. "And now you clean hotels." "And now I clean hotels," she agreed. She said it without apology, without irony, without anything except the plain fact of it. He nodded slowly. "The document. You noticed that while you were cleaning." "I notice things," she said. "I've always noticed things. It's what teachers do." He looked at her for a long moment. Not the way people usually looked at her in this building. Not through her. He looked at her the way she imagined. He looked at the documents on his table. Carefully, with real attention, trying to understand what he was actually seeing. "The deal is proceeding," he said. "They found the drafting error. It was their side. Not intentional, apparently. A template error from an older agreement." "I'm glad it's moving forward," she said. "Because of you. Because of their lawyers fixing the error," she said. "I just pointed at the page." He almost smiled again. "More than last time, almost all the way. You are remarkably unbothered by what you just did." She considered this. "I'm 68 years old. I've been unbothered for a while now." He asked her about her background. She told him. The teaching, the language elective, Leonard, the pension, the last few years. She didn't make it sad. It wasn't sad the way she told it. It was just a life, the way lives go, full of things you chose, and things that happened to you and things you did anyway, because you were the kind of person who did things anyway. He listened the way she'd learned to spot in students. Really listened, the kind where the person is actually taking in what you're saying, not just waiting for their turn. Then he said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to understand that you are completely free to say no." She waited. Shengtai has been trying to build an American season team for 2 years. People who understand both sides, not just linguistically but culturally. People who can be in a room and notice things. The kind of people that... He paused. The kind of people who are rarely in rooms like that. He said he couldn't promise her a title yet, or a salary figure, or anything formal. Those things would need to go through proper channels. But he wanted her to meet with his American legal team before they flew back to Shenzhen. He wanted her name in a conversation that would happen in about 2 weeks. He wanted her to understand that what she had done today was not nothing. Aldine was quiet for a moment. She thought about Leonard, about the way he'd looked at her when she passed that Mandarin proficiency exam. Proud, in the simple way that some people are proud, without needing to perform it. She thought about the elective, and the students who'd come back years later to tell her it had changed something in how they saw the world. She thought about the library books and the cassette tapes, and the long evenings after Leonard got sick when she'd practice tones in the dark so she wouldn't wake him. She thought about the Hargrove Grand, and the pressed uniform and the $12 above minimum wage. She said, "I'd like that." The meeting with the legal team was 2 weeks later. Then there was a phone call. Then a formal offer letter with a title, Cultural and Linguistic Liaison, which she thought was both accurate and a little funny given where she'd been working when this all started. She gave her notice at the hotel on a Thursday. Her supervisor, a woman named Gloria who had always been decent to her, wished her well and looked a little dazed, the way people look when the world doesn't behave the way they expected. On her last day, she cleaned her assigned floors the same way she'd always cleaned them. Every surface, every corner, spotless. She turned in her uniform pressed and folded. Garrison Holt, for his part, called her. She hadn't expected that. He said he owed her an apology, not for anything specific, just for the general shape of things, which she thought was a decent way to put it. She told him she appreciated the call. She meant it. He asked if she'd ever considered consulting work on the American side. She told him she'd think about it. She didn't tell him she'd already said yes to Way's team. Some information you keep until the timing is right. Another thing teaching had taught her. I've been sitting with this story for a while now. Not because it's hard to tell, it isn't. It's the kind of story that tells itself once you know the shape of it. What I keep coming back to is not the deal, or the language, or even the moment in the conference room when everything shifted. What I keep coming back to is the 16 years of cassette tapes. 16 years of a woman sitting alone in a small room, learning a language no one asked her to learn, in a country that would mostly never know she'd done it. Not for a promotion, not for applause. Because she was teaching a class about the world, and she wanted to actually understand what she was teaching. Because she was that kind of person. The room going silent when Aldine opened her mouth. That was the moment everyone else got to see what she already knew about herself. But the real story? The real story was every evening before that. Every tape rewound. Every tone practiced. Every moment she chose to keep going, even when the going was only visible to her. I don't think talent is rare. I think we're just not always in the habit of asking. Not always in the habit of looking at who's actually in the room. Aldine Mercer was in that room. She'd been in that room for 11 years. It just took one spilled cup of coffee for anyone to notice.